If you really want to gain life points for whatever reason, generally the best way to go about it is to just stall and slowly gain life points every turn. So, what are the best cards that gain the most amount of life points every turn that are actually decent? This is the deck building hypothetical question we'll be answering in this video, for a question that generally doesn't come up because life point gain in general is pretty terrible. And at number 10, we have Sprite Elf. This one may surprise some people because the card itself doesn't actually have an effect to gain life points at all. This is a Link 2 monster which requires 2 monsters as materials, with at least one of them being a 2 monster. Either a level, rank, or another Link 2. And it has the effect where, as a quick effect, you can special summon a level 2 monster from your graveyard, or if your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon a rank or Link 2 monster instead. The effect is a hard once per turn, and most importantly, does not negate the effects of the monster that it summons. So, if you have a red resonator in your graveyard, you can special summon it with the effect of Sprite Elf, targeting Elf on the field, and gain 1400 life points with the effect of Red Resonator, which has the effect to gain life points equal to the attack of any one monster in the field when it's special summoned. Additionally, Red Resonator has a normal summon effect to special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your hand. So Red Resonator can actually help set up a Sprite Elf summon all by itself, then be brought back immediately with Sprite Elf to gain 1400 life points. Or even more if there's a stronger monster on board, because it can target anything. And since Sprite Elf's effect is a quick effect, you can bring back Red Resonator during your opponent's turn to gain another 1400 life points. As long as you keep putting Red Resonator back into the graveyard, which I should mention is very easy since it's also a tuner, you can just keep bringing it back to gain a whole bunch of life points every turn. Out of all the cards in this list, this is probably the best way to gain the most amount of life points every turn in each player's turn. But the only reason it's so low on this list is because it's a 2-card combo, as neither of the cards can gain life points on their own. And you really need Sprite Elf in order to do this combo, which is a card that's currently banned in the TCG. Everything else on this list will actually be a little bit inferior to this combo, but they'll also be legal and probably a little bit more playable alongside Floodgates. And at number 9, we have Soul Absorption. This is a continuous spell which simply has the effect to gain 500 life points for each card that's banished. So if you activate something like Pot of Desires, which banishes 10 cards from the top of your deck face down to draw 2, you can gain 5,000 life points. Or if you activate Eater of Millions to banish 15 cards from your extra deck, you can gain 7,500 life points. Or if you have Gizmek Orochi the Serpentron Sky Slasher and special summon it from the grave, you'll gain 4,000 life points. Basically, if you're playing a Grand Manju deck, you can gain an obscene amount of life points every turn with Soul Absorption. And you can do this every turn for any amount of banishes. If you have a deck that banishes a whole bunch of cards like Grand Manju decks regularly, then this is an easy way to easily double or triple your life points. However, there are so few decks that can actually take advantage of Soul Absorption, and the ones that can't actually search the card out. So if you're playing a deck that really wants to gain a massive amount of life points to use them for something, then you can't really rely on this card because it's only useful in very specific types of decks, and incredibly hard to actually get out of your deck in order to start using it. So it's unreliable at best and doesn't really help contribute to the win condition of Grand Manju, which is probably the best deck that can make use of it. So it's not even included in the deck that's able to use it the best because life point gain is just not needed in that deck at all. And at number 8, we have number XX Utopic Dark Infinity. This is a generic rank 10 monster with 4,000 attack and defense, which has the effect where, once per turn, you can target another face-up special summon monster you control to gain life points equal to its original attack. So this is basically like Red Resonator, except it's able to use the effect every turn instead of only on a special summon. And it doesn't require to detach any of its materials like you normally would have to for effects like this on an Xyz monster. And that's because its actual detach effect is basically like Yugioh Guardian, where it can special summon a monster distressed by battle by detaching one of its materials. So if you have another high attack monster in the field, you can target them to gain a ton of life points every turn. However, the problem with this card is specifically that it's a rank 10 monster. Rank 10 monsters are generally pretty hard to go into, outside of the Mother Spider Splitter combo, because level 10 monsters are not easy to special summon. And there really isn't an archetype that can special summon level 10 monsters super easily, that can afford to go into Dark Infinity to start getting life points. Because generally, if you're going into rank 10s, you can just win the game instead by going into the Gustav Liebe combo. And even the Mother Spider Splitter combo can kind of win on its own through its own OTK, which is the only reason it's kind of low on this list. The effect to gain life points is really good for a list like this, but also kind of impractical to actually go into this monster. And at number 7, we have Ebon's Sun. This is a continuous spell card which has 3 effects. The important one is that if a face-up monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you get to gain life points equal to its original attack, or original attacks plural, if multiple of your cards get destroyed at once with something like a Dark Hole. Additionally, its other effects are that if you summon a monster from your graveyard, you can give them 1000 attack, or if a spell or trap card is discarded from your hand, you can add one of them back to your hand. And each of its effects are hard once per turn. So, on a hard once per turn, you can gain life points equal to destroyed attack of some of your monsters. So if you simply crash one of your monsters into one of your opponents, you'll gain life points. And if it's destroyed on your opponent's turn, you'll gain life points. So it's one of the few cards which can gain life points during both players' turns. Now, the only real drawback to this card is it requires your monsters to get destroyed to gain the effect. But a really big upside is it doesn't require your opponent to destroy your cards, just simply that they are destroyed. So you can proc the effect with your own Dark Hole or Torrential Tribute, which makes this card actually allowed to be on this list because without the distinction, I don't think it would have been very good. But because it does work this way, it's a pretty decent card to gain some passive life points every turn. And it's a lot more usable than a card like Soul Absorption, which only works in very specific decks. Because in an average duel, your monsters are going to get destroyed whether you want them to or not. So it's much easier to set up this life point gain. Currently, this card is not in the TCG yet, and I don't expect it to make a huge splash when it does eventually arrive, unless you're really into life point gain cards. And at number 6, we have Humid Winds. This is a continuous trap where, if your life points are lower than your opponent's, you can gain 500 life points once per turn. And the effect does work on both players' turns. So it's an easy 500 life points every turn as long as you have lower life points than your opponent, which is a pretty easy condition to meet with its first effect, where you can also pay 1000 life points to add an aroma monster from your deck to your hand every turn. So the card basically allows you to go +1 and then gain life points. And aromas do have some pretty decent cards to search out, like if you want another card to gain life points every turn in the form of Aroma Jar, or if you want to draw cards every time you gain life points with Aromage Jasmine. But if you're trying to gain life points every turn in order to get a massive amount of life points, Humid Winds can't really contribute to that goal, unless your opponent also has a large amount of life points, which is the only thing keeping it back from being higher on this list because it's actually one of the better cards on this list in general because it's just a free +1 every turn. And at number 5, we have number 49 Fortune Tune. This is a generic rank 3 monster with the effect to gain 500 life points during each of your standby phases. Additionally, it can't be targeted by card effects, and if it would be destroyed, you can detach one of its materials instead. Also, if it's sent from the field to the grave, you can shuffle 2 level 3 monsters from your graveyard back into your deck in order to return this card from your graveyard back to your extra deck, which is actually a pretty decent form of recursion, of getting your resources back into your deck without having to spend another resource to do so. And since the card can't be targeted, it's great to go into if you're just trying to get a quick Zeus, by attacking into something and protecting itself with its detach effect, then having a 2 material Zeus after. So the card actually does see some competitive play because it can be used to go into Zeus for level 3s. And also it's kind of hard to get rid of since it can't be targeted. So you can just comfortably leave it in defense position for a few turns in order to gain life points. But it does have a really low defense point value at only 900. So unless you're using digit jamming to make 900 a premium defense point value, it's not going to be walling off any major threats. And that's really the thing keeping this card from being higher on this list. It's just too easy to be destroyed by battle, so it's not going to stick around that long. And at number 4, we have Neospacian Air Hummingbird. This card has the effect to gain 500 life points for each card in your opponent's hand. So if you use this on turn 1, you can gain 2500 life points right off the bat, which is actually a pretty huge amount of life points to gain from one card. And this effect can just be used every turn, as long as your opponent has any cards in their hand. So if your opponent just has one card in hand, this is still as much life points every turn as using Fortune Tune, or if they have 2 cards, that's the same as having Humid Winds give you life points during yours and your opponent's turn. If you have some way to refill your opponent's hand because you're trying to deck them out by giving them a bunch of cards in their hand, you can gain even more life points. Although the main problem with this card is that it has very low stats, and it does take up your normal summon or resources to special summon it from other places, which thankfully it does have really good support in order to bring it out from the deck or graveyard. Although even with a whole bunch of cards to bring this card out from your deck, it's still just not very good on its own, and you have to have some way to protect it with Floodgates, or a Moon Mirror Shield, or Digit Jamming, unlike something like a Dark Infinity, which has really high stats and also just gains life points every turn. The biggest benefit it has over something like Dark Infinity is not requiring other special summon monsters, and of course being 10 times easier to bring out to the field, while also still gaining a decent chunk of life points every turn. And at number 3, we have Freezing Fire. This is a level 3 monster that can special summon itself from your hand if either player gains life points. Then it has a trigger effect where if either player gains life points while it's on the field, you can make either player gain 1000 life points. So, one of the problems Hummingbird has is that it kind of requires other support to make its summoning cost easier. And thankfully, it does have really good other support to bring it out easier. But Freezing Fire is even better because it can bring itself out. If you're playing a deck that's just trying to get life points every turn, Freezing Fire's Special Summon effect will be activated by just doing your normal strategy, which is better than trying to do something like Generation Next into a Neospace and Air Hummingbird out of your deck. And then, if you're getting life points every turn, you just get an extra 1,000 on top of it during both players' turns. So, gaining 2,000 life points during yours and your opponent's turn, it will be 500 less than Neospace and Air Hummingbird, getting 2,500 off of a 5-card hand. But your opponent's not going to have a 5-card hand for very long. So over time, Freezing Fire will be giving you more life points than Hummingbird, and it's a much easier card to keep alive since its stats aren't pathetically weak. But there's still not anything good either, to be honest. So it does absolutely require protection, just like Air Hummingbird. But it's much easier to bring out and could potentially gain more life points, which is why it's a little bit higher. Additionally, this card can be used in Nurse Burn decks too, since it can cost your opponent to gain the life points every turn. Although Nurse Burn decks generally try to win in one turn, so they probably wouldn't play this card. And at number 2, we have Munin, the Runick Wings. This card has the effect to gain 1,000 life points during each player's end phase. And it has 2,000 defense, so right off the bat, it's the same amount of life points as Freezing Fire every turn, while also being much more survivable and not requiring any other triggers in order to gain that 1,000 life points. And funny enough, Munin is actually easy to bring out because it's a Runick monster. And every single Runick quick play spell card in the game has an effect to bring out this card or use its normal effect. So since its archetype can bring this card out as easily as breathing, it's probably one of the easiest cards to bring out on this list. And the archetype is actually pretty good too, with its main field spell constantly being hit on the ban list. Additionally, the card has other effects, where you can banish this card in order to negate the effect of a card that targets a Runick card on the field, in addition to having an on-summon effect where you can search out a Runick continuous spell, which no one really uses. But as far as life point gain goes, you can't really get better than Munin the Runick Wings, unless you're looking to gain an insane amount of life points every turn. And at number 1, we have Cauldron of the Old Man. This is a continuous spell which allows you to gain life points or deal damage to your opponent based on the number of counters it has, where it gains 500 life points for each counter, or it deals 300 damage to your opponent for each counter, and on activation it places one counter on it immediately, and then gains an additional one during each of your standby phases. And the important thing to know about this card is that it doesn't consume the counters when it uses its life point gain or burn effects. So, on your first turn you can gain 500 life points, on your second you gain 1,000, on your third you gain 1,500, fourth turn 2,000, and so on and so on. The longer you manage to stall out, the higher the amount of life points you can gain every turn becomes, already outpacing Munin and Freezing Fire after only 3 turns. And it doesn't require you to special summon any monsters to the board. You just have to hard draw into this card and then place it on the field and start using it. It also doesn't require any other cards to work like Ebon Sun or Soul Absorption, as it is completely self-reliant and self-sustaining. Additionally, since it has the option to deal burn damage, at a certain point you can just use the card to win the game too, by just burning your opponent for the counters instead of gaining life points. This card basically does it all. It is easily the ultimate life point gain card, since it gains you the most amount every turn, and even has the option to just win you the game on its own. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other life point gain cards you may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.